All right, guys, hopefully we have a good one today. I am not entirely sure what we're in for here. We're going to focus on a coolant temperature sensor issue with this car where apparently the coolant temperature sensor has been replaced, still has a coolant temperature sensor code. That is all that I know from the owner. There is, let's see if we look here, a plethora of things on this old truck. This was actually a vehicle bought at a salvage yard that the person purchased as a farm truck. The lady actually is about 80 years old. She's got horses on her property and bought this truck for that purpose mostly and just wants some things fixed on it, actually quite a few things. Many of which are listed here behind me, but I will actually take care of most of those off camera because I have learned my lesson now that in the last 3 times of doing a typical weekend in the garage where I just film whatever comes in, and if it needs ball joints, we do ball joints, even though we don't usually do mechanical simple stuff on this channel like that. But I have learned in the last few times that I have filmed those that it has become a disaster, as we've invariably in the last 3 episodes of that typical weekend in the garage series run into some serious electrical issues. The last one, that parasitic draw, took me 3 days to figure out. I am no longer doing typical days in the garage because typically that's destroying my entire weekend as we end up with these bizarre electrical things. And I'm kind of thinking maybe we've got a thing with this car that, that is going to be the case there. This is a 98 Ford Explorer XLT. It is a salvage vehicle. There is every reason to think that this could be a miserable experience. So we are just going to focus only on whatever this coolant temperature sensor issue is. Now, when I started the car, I did notice, and this is another complaint that the owner has that may be related, the vehicle had a long crank time, really long crank time. That could also be, of course, anything else, fuel pressure, vacuum leak, whatever. But could be related, of course, also with an engine coolant temperature sensor issue. And the other thing I noticed is that the temperature gauge on the dashboard appears to work. Now, that's not totally surprising in that very often you will actually have 2 engine coolant temperature sensors on a vehicle. One of them will be for the dashboard readout, and I'm going to say that that one is working, but then the other one will be for the engine computer to report the engine coolant temperature, and that is the one that I would suspect, I guess, maybe isn't working. But it does appear that the dashboard one is working. If there is even 2 of them on this vehicle, I'm not entirely sure. So let's go ahead, and I'm really excited because it's been a little while since the last video. We need to use our top-down scan tool, so let's go check it out. All right, as you guys are well familiar, I did a review of the Phoenix Smart with the scope, the 4-channel oscilloscope that was sent to me by Top-Down for review here. And I do have to tell you, I have been regularly using this, and I do have to say, this is my new favorite scan tool for sure. Probably out of the range of most do-it-yourselfers if you're just working on your own vehicle or whatever. But if you are a professional or a mobile mechanic, or you are like me and you're fixing everyone's cars in your neighborhood and everything, I do have to tell you, it is hard-pressed to get a better tool than this. This, again, is the Phoenix Smart. So we're going to go over to the auto scan here. I will be shocked if it pulls up the VIN on a 98. This has been going for a little while, so I don't think it's going to find it. Yeah, it's asking me to manually enter the VIN. I am going to go ahead and do that. I'll be right back. Yeah, as awesome as this is, one thing is that it does not appear, at least as far as everything I have tried, that I'm able to project the image from the device onto my television screen to make it bigger and easier to see and all that. On a lot of these Android-based devices, you can usually access the Android-based functions on here, but I can tell you that I have checked everything on here, and there really doesn't appear to be any way to access the standard Android-based functions on here, which would allow me to do screen projection. But one of the things is I'm always dealing with the glare there. Hopefully that's better. And if it gets too annoying, we may switch over to something we can use on the big screen. It's also, this is an Explorer, it's also something with the scope. I still very much prefer the Pico scope. The interface is definitely a lot easier to use for sure, although the scope, absolutely, I have used it on my top Don here. If we have to do any scope functions, we will go ahead and do that again on this top Don. But I do have to say, I do still prefer the Pico scope for sure. And again, the ability to present it on my large screen makes for better video. I think we'll stick with top Don for this particular one, just to give you guys a little more experience with it. But as we can see across the top here, like I mentioned, you really got to pay attention because every time you connect to a vehicle, the menus change based on that particular vehicle. So a lot of things are up here now that would not necessarily be available on other vehicles. You can see we also have our awesome topology here. This is obviously a non-CAN design here. We're going to hit Smart Scan. That's really ultimately what you should do every single time. And this will scan every module, check communication back and forth from the module, and also, of course, report any codes. We got a couple in this GEM. I'm not sure what a GEM is. I wonder if it'll... It's got to finish first. We'll let it do its thing. We got a couple of PCM codes. That'll be our check engine light for sure. Okay, GEM, oh, this is a generic electronic module. This looks like a couple of, well, okay, that's interesting. A couple of four-wheel drive circuit faults. Not sure what the deal is with that. There's no complaint of the four-wheel drive not working. Let me see where the selector is real quick. Well, the selector is on auto, so we may play around with that. That may be another video if the owner is interested in pursuing that. So there may be some four-wheel drive selector issues. There's our powertrain control. P0118, looks like we got a temperature sensor circuit high. Okay, so that right there, the fact that we've got a high, we know we've got an open, most likely somewhere. Could be a failed temperature sensor as well, but most likely we're going to find an open on here. So maybe the... Well, the coolant temperature sensor was replaced though, so we could have a wiring issue here for sure. We also have the P1000, the system not readiness. My guess is that's from clearing the code on whoever worked on this before, and then of course that just shows up when the readiness isn't completed for the emissions monitors. Okay, so P0118. So we want to, first of all, the first thing I want to do, obviously, is we want to get some data on that coolant temperature sensor, but also, like I mentioned, the engine does show that the temperature gauge does give a reading. One of the things we want to do before we do anything else, I just want to check the coolant level. Obviously, if there's really low coolant, that can cause a failure to read. We have coolant in the reservoir here. Yeah, there's coolant in the reservoir here. We're going to check the coolant here. Well, let's see, that may be a little low. No, it's a little bit low, but it's below the radiator neck. I think I'm going to go ahead and just top that off. Okay, coolant topped off there. Let's see if this car starts. Well, it actually started right up that time. Previously, it did not do that. As a matter of fact, when the owner brought it here, we got all kinds of noises with this engine. There's some bad pulleys. There's a power steering line. This is a whole list of things that they want fixed, which we'll get to, but we want to get to the fun stuff first. Let's let this engine warm up for a second, and we will see if the hard start problem maybe only happens when the engine is warm, possibly. But when the owner did pull the car up, they did pull up to my driveway, and then I had them pull into the garage. They went to start the car. The car wouldn't start. It cranked for a long time, several attempts, before finally the engine did start. So it definitely has some kind of hard start problem. Car's been sitting for a few hours here until I got to it though, so maybe it's just when the engine is hot that it has the starting problem. May or may not be related with this engine coolant temperature sensor. All right, let's go take a look at the dashboard. All right, we got check engine light on. You can see that the temperature gauge is up off of 0. Turn it off and, oh, there it is. Yeah, car's having a hard time starting. Okay, giving a little bit of the gas pedal actually got it to start. Let's try that again. Yeah, car started up a little better that time. Yeah, pumping the gas pedal a little bit does help. It's a little bit indicative maybe this is a vacuum leak issue. We'll take a look at that real quick too. Definitely the hard start when the car is a little bit warmed up. As we can see, the engine temperature gauge is moving up a little bit more. I'm gonna let this fully warm up. While we do that, let's go ahead and pull some data. I don't know if that power steering pump is coming through on the camera, but it is kind of annoying. All right, let's go to our data stream here. I'm just gonna check if the power steering fluid level is low. Nope, it's not. Yeah, that's definitely a bad power steering pump. Okay, we want to get some engine coolant temperature data. There is some right there. There's our engine coolant temperature. Let's get the voltage as well. Also want to get some fuel trim on here because I'm kind of thinking in that direction with the hard start. Although a little bit less likely given the fact that it seems to be when the engine is more warm that we are having the starting problem. That actually very well could be from an open in the coolant temperature sensor because it's going to think it's like minus 40 degrees if it's open, and it's not. There's long-term trims and short-term trims. Let's just go with that right now. Oh, and there we are right there, 4.6 volts on the coolant temperature sensor right there. That's all I need to see. That is open. It's also validated here, like I said, minus 40. When you have an open on either an IAT or an ECT, any kind of a temperature sensor, if it's open circuit, you'll read minus 40. And that is what we have here. So we look at our fuel trims, those don't look too bad at all. Let's just see what happens with that when I give it some acceleration. All right, let's see what this looks like with some, yeah, we don't have a fuel trim problem, it looks like. Kind of like where our fuel trims are. A little bit weird, the long terms aren't reading. I've seen this before on a Ford. We actually have a video on this. Okay, and we can clearly see the temperature gauge now is at a normal position for warmed up engine. So I do believe we're going to find there are 2 engine coolant temperature sensors. Maybe we'll be lucky and the person just replaced the wrong one or something. So let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, where might coolant temperature sensors be? So often these are, boy, this is a 98. I haven't seen a 98 in such a long time, but usually what I like to do is I like to follow the coolant hoses, and a lot of times it'll be right next to the thermostat is a really good place to look. As a matter of fact, I do believe I see what looks to be probably a coolant temperature sensor right next to the thermostat. Unfortunately, it is underneath the plenum, and it is like really under it, like to the point it may be very difficult to back probe that. Let's see if I can get, nope, this is not friendly at all. So my other thing that I could do, I could look for the wire harness, and then we could tap into this wire harness. Unfortunately, that wire harness goes under the intake manifold. And by the time it comes back out, it's going to be in a harness with 50 million other wires. So this is kind of a challenge. How do we test this coolant temperature sensor? If I can't back probe it, I can't even access it. There's no way I can even access this. Wow, really? Seriously? Yeah, the plenum would have to come off. Okay, so let's see if there's an easier way we can do this. I think what I'm going to do is look at a wire diagram, and I notice that the engine PCM is just right here. How easy is that? Maybe what we can do is we can look and do some research. Do we have two coolant temperature sensors here? And then let's see if we can find the PCM pins, and we can do our measurement from here and not have to take this engine apart. Okay, well, here's one coolant temperature sensor right there, left of throttle body. That is exactly where I was looking, so I do believe I am in the right place. Looks like we've got a light green and red and a gray and red. Let me just double check and see if I can see the wiring. Well, to say that I could pick colors out on that wire, both of them are just so completely covered in dirt. They both just look absolutely dark gray. So I'm going to assume that that's one. Now what I want to do is look and see where this goes. So let's follow these. One of these is going to be to obviously a 5-volt reference here. We can see the junction right there. The other one goes off the screen and right into the PCM. Okay, so now I'm curious, is there another engine coolant temperature sensor that's going to go to the gauge? So let's see if we can find one. There was our first one. Don't see it there. The fact that we merged into what was clearly, obviously a 5-volt reference signal is pretty clear indication that we have 5-volt reference to that sensor. Because we obviously have it on the other sensors as well. So I'm hoping this is just going to be a bad sensor and maybe they replaced the wrong one. Now, where is the other coolant temperature sensor? And that is the end of my diagram. So I'm a little confused on that. Let me check back here. I'm really thinking there should be two coolant temperature sensors here. No, that's IAT. We can see that IAT merges right in with that same 5-volt reference as well. So we are not worried about a 5-volt reference unless there is a direct 5-volt reference failure on this gray and red to our ECT. But I am trying to figure out why the gauge works. Yeah, it's probably just not shown is my guess. Let's go to another diagram. All right, so what I'm doing is searching for the instrument cluster here. And let's see if we can find the, right there, engine coolant temperature gauge. And let's see if we can find, yeah, this is clearly different wiring on here. So there are two. We are going to go back to our PCM one. All right, right there, we're able to get our coolant temperature sensor wire. One of the things I want to do, I want to try to be smart about this before we start poking away at a PCM. Let's take advantage of something that we learned from the diagram. And what that is knowing that, for example, the IAT is on that same 5-volt reference, we should have normal data from the IAT. If we do not, then of course, well, that would be very hard to explain how we don't have a check engine light for it, but it would change our direction. Rather remarkably, if we also find that we don't have a reading on the IAT. But as many splits off as there were, I believe, the throttle position sensor, I believe everything is going to be using that same 5-volt reference. But let's see if we can find a intake air temperature. Yeah, right there. Okay, so let's get voltage and actual temperature. And we can see that it absolutely works. Okay, so this is not a 5-volt reference issue. This is either going to be something on the signal, something with the sensor itself, or something with the PCM. I think the easiest thing to do is going to be to just read it at the PCM. All right, got the pin on the PCM back probed for our ECT. And now we have a whole just crazy plethora of things that we can do now that we've tapped this. So I think one of the easiest things to do is let's just get a voltage reading. So much easier to just, I mean, it wasn't even 5 minutes to probe this wire than to take off the intake manifold, particularly if we didn't have justification to it. At least if we were hacks and we didn't know how to do electrical, we could have said, well, you know, you got to replace the intake manifold gasket anyway, and we're going to replace the coolant temperature sensor because we might as well do that while we're there anyway. Yeah, we don't have to do that. We can see whether this intake needs to come off or not. Okay, and wow, okay, we get 5 volts there. Let me think about that. Okay, so obviously reading 5 volts at the PCM based on my assumption of the design was a little bit of a surprise, but it's not a big deal. It just means it's in reverse of what I thought it was. And we do have 5 volts from the PCM that goes to the engine coolant. And gray and red wire here, which I thought was the 5-volt reference, only because we see it splits off and shares with everything. So I just thought this was a shared 5-volt reference. That is not going to be the case. The only explanation for what we saw is that this is going to be a signal return that is shared for everything. And the light red on our engine coolant temperature right here, that is actually 5 volts from the PCM. We verified that. So it is definitely not a PCM problem. Either we're not getting 5 volts to our ECT, we are not getting signal return from the ECT wiring issue or something, or there is something open in the ECT itself. And I am more inclined to believe that there is going to be probably some kind of open in the ECT itself. Either way, we are justified. We need to get to the engine coolant temperature sensor. This justifies an expense for removing the intake manifold. So this really still a little bit unexpected, but the point of this is by doing this extra 5 minutes, by testing at the PCM, by not guessing, we prevent a issue where we would remove the intake manifold, maybe replace the sensor, put everything back together, still have the problem because we didn't do our due diligence to see where the issue actually was. And then how do you charge for that? Oh yeah, I didn't know what I was doing, so I just guessed at removing the intake manifold, didn't have to do that, I'm gonna have to charge you $300, right? We don't have to do that, we were smart. So let's just verify here, but there's no other way. This has to go to shared ground. So we see all of this splits off to a new screen. We'll follow that. It continues splitting off every which direction here. Let's see, so we've got gray and red and oranges down here. The gray and red is going to be a signal return. I can guarantee it is right there. If we zoom in a little bit more, we can see our signal return on the gray and red. The other wires actually split off to other sensors and things. Just goes to show, you know, not to make assumptions, but it didn't really matter. It was no different. Obviously, what I would have expected to see was 0 volts at that pin. But seeing the 5 volts at the pin, the only explanation for that, and having the minus 40 degrees, having an open, is that it was the reverse of what I thought. Big deal. All right, so we know what we need to do now. And what I want to do is I want to see if we can get the PCM to read a change on our signal here. That would confirm 100% that we do not have wire integrity issue. We don't have a PCM issue. Okay, we can see it reads minus 40 degrees. What I'm going to do is I'm going to short out that signal. Oh no, he's going to blow the computer. This guy's such a hack. He's going to blow the computer. All right, and grounding that out, we see that we get 254 degrees. Oops, there goes our connection there. Okay, so we can see this is not a PCM issue. That is very, very good news. We can see the PCM is able to read difference when we ground that signal out. We also see that we are clearly on the correct pin in our connector. That is always a thing. It's a very, very crowded connector here, as you can see. So always the possibility for a mistake there, but I know I'm on the right pin. There's no question. So we know we are justified in removing this intake manifold. Our issue is at that sensor. There is no question.